Perfect. I'll get out of here and I'm going to hand it over to James for you guys to ask some questions. I just want to remind you this is a 2-hour course for 2 credits. We'll have a short break in between the hours just to answer some questions. You can use the bathroom, but this is 2 hours. So buckle up and here we go. Over to you, James.
All right, thanks, Marielle. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody see my screen? Is it showing? I just want to make sure it's sharing. Okay, great.
Yes,
We see, yeah.
Okay, you see
Yep.
the cover page of the presentation, yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Looks good.
All right, great.
We want to avoid losing a fortune, so we're ready.
Let's hope everybody can capitalize on this. So thanks for the introduction, Marielle, much appreciated. My name is James LaGreca. I'm the founder and CEO of LG Consultants, also known as LGC. We are an owner representation project management firm, which means we manage construction projects, particularly large-scale capital improvement projects for condominium associations and homeowner associations. I've been in this industry for about 12 years now. Prior to the world of owner representation, I come from the world of construction. I am a licensed general contractor and certified construction manager with a bunch of other certifications in construction that I won't bore you with. I do carry a master's in architecture, and I taught at the university level in the architecture department at 2 universities for about 10 years, which was a great experience, not monetarily, but experience-wise. I have a love for construction. I've been in it my whole life. I started at a very young age and eventually opened my own general contracting firm. And we are an active general contractor with active projects. And then we also provide the consultation through LG Consultants, as I mentioned. I like to think that the years of experience and education in the various sectors of the overall industry lend a hand in LG Consultants' ability to properly represent our clients and help them get through the complicated process of construction in these communities. All that being said, we decided to put together this 2-hour CEU course in an effort to help educate communities such as yourself, whether you're a board member or a property manager or a resident. It's knowledge is power, and it's helpful to understand the overall process from a global perspective to help you keep out of trouble as best as possible. So without further ado, we shall get started. We put together a little agenda. We're going to talk about what a capital improvement project is by definition. Where do we begin? Phases to success, and then some FAQs, and then we'll open it up for a little discussion. As Marielle mentioned, we're going to save we'll save the questions for the end, basically. This way I can maintain the flow and make sure we have time to get through the whole presentation. But somewhere in the middle, we're going to stop for a little intermission. We'll take 5-10 minutes, whatever is needed. And if anybody has any questions, we can chat at that time. And then we'll continue on to the end and open it up for a full discussion. So what is a capital improvement project? Well, basically, and by definition, it's a permanent alteration, repair, or restoration of a property that increases its value, extends its useful life, or adapts it to new uses. Some examples of capital improvement projects, which I'm sure many of you have lived through within your own communities, might be roof replacement, elevator modernization, window and doors, pool deck restoration, cooling tower replacement, concrete restoration. That's a big one, right? A lot of people are going through this. A lot of our clients have concrete restoration projects. Interior beautification, ELSS, Engineered Life Safety System, which depending on the size of the building you live in would determine whether or not you're mandated for that. So where do you begin, right? Well, for starters, you're going to want to you're going to determine if the capital improvement project is too large for you to handle in-house, right? For your management team to handle in-house, or anyone else that may be helping the community along in these types of scenarios. And if it is a little too large, then you may want to consider engaging an independent third-party professional. What's an example of one? Well, you're looking at it, an owner rep project manager. Some may say, well, why shouldn't I utilize my architect or engineer to manage the project? Which is a fair question. And I'll have this in the FAQ section as well, but I want to touch on it a little bit while we're here. Basically, the role of the architect and engineer really should not be jeopardized by attempting to combine owner representation services in conjunction with design professional services. Equally important, fulfilling both roles could easily be considered a conflict of interest, as they would be providing oversight to themselves, basically. Owner representation project management really should be an independent third-party entity in order for it to be effective and what we would consider conflict-free, right? Another question we get a lot is, well, why can't we utilize our property manager to manage the projects? If they're small enough and it's more of a maintenance type of agreement, things of that nature, by all means, property management should probably step in and handle that stuff. If the project is quite large, well, the property manager really needs to focus on running the building / property, right? The communities that they represent are very challenging to manage day to day and typically require more than full-time attention. And for you property managers out there, you probably know what I'm talking about. We see a lot of property managers burning the candle at both ends because their role is very challenging. And attempting to toggle back and forth between property management and project management is likely to lead to burnout, and possibly the detriment of either the property or the project. So having that designated professional is key to success. Why shouldn't we represent ourselves, right? This is a board member might say, well, why shouldn't board members try to manage these projects? The role of the board members should be geared toward making well-informed decisions on behalf of the residents that they were elected to represent. And basing decisions on anything other than expert consultation is a recipe for disaster, as they could be held responsible for decisions made on their own. Having expert consultation in place is paramount to insulating the board from criticism, which happens a lot, and any liabilities that come along with making decisions in a vacuum. So that being said, we're always advocating for the appropriate representation for the appropriate scenario. And I always like to use the analogy of legal counsel, right? Just because you can represent yourself in a court of law doesn't mean you should, right? So just because you can represent yourself with one of these large capital improvement projects doesn't necessarily mean you should either. So some advantages to having professional oversight versus not. Clear scope definition, which, by the way, is the most important part of any given project, and I'll hone in on that on a later slide when we get there. I just want to get through these a little bit quicker so we can get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So clear scope definition versus lack of scope clarity, which basically leads to scope creep and excessive change orders. Nobody likes that, right? Well-informed design team selection versus uninformed decisions, which basically lead to selecting the wrong design team or any other professionals for that matter. Professional design management versus over-designing or under-designing, which basically leads to inaccurate design and cost overruns, value analyses versus missed cost opportunities, permit strategies versus permit bottlenecks. A lot of time can be eaten up with these permit bottlenecks, and if you're really not sure how to navigate through the permit process efficiently, you waste a bunch of time and money. Well-informed contractor selection versus selecting the wrong contractor because the decisions were not well informed. Contract development and collaboration with legal counsel, that's a big one. You should always have legal counsel generate your contracts, and they should always work in tandem with a construction professional to make sure that the business terms and exhibits are actually in line with what was agreed upon. Adequate project scheduling and budgeting versus mismanagement of funds. proactive approach versus reactive approach, quality assurance versus dissatisfaction with end result, expert project oversight versus chaos, which lead to timely and costly mistakes. So, putting the appropriate professional or professionals in place is key to a project's success. It keeps things organized, streamlined, and ultimately helps you avoid a lot of the things that we mentioned here on this particular slide. The phases to success. Whether your project is managed in-house or by that designated professional we talked about, there really are 4 distinct phases to success. You have planning, pre-construction, construction administration, and closeout. And we're going to talk about each one of them independently, so you have a little bit of an idea of what might take place during any given phase. So during planning, this is an opportunity for the person who's going to ultimately be managing the project to collect any and all documentation relative to the project or projects that have been generated to date, analyze them, and come up with a plan and a strategy on how to proceed from that point. If nothing's been generated to date, that's fine too. Then a plan needs to be put in place on how to start and what that's going to look like from a detailed scheduling perspective, right? So this is all part of the strategy. So first and foremost, you want to understand, are there clear signs of damage or deficiencies that are actually driving the need for this repair, replacement, or remediation? Like, spalling concrete or something of the like? Or is the project being driven by mandates imposed by the authority having jurisdiction, right? Your building department or a local municipality or Florida building code. You have to know the rules, guys, in order to stay ahead of this stuff. You're always better off being proactive versus reactive. When you're proactive, you're in much greater control and you have the ability to control your destiny. Being reactive, you lose some of that and you ultimately lose time and money as a result. Or is the community just driving the project because they wish to implement aesthetic upgrades, right? Like maybe they want to beautify their lobby or common areas or a clubhouse in their HOA. But you really need to identify what's driving the project. Is it a need or is it a want, right? You also want to understand what's the primary objective here. Is it time? Is it money? Or is it quality? Because depending on what the most important part, or whichever of these is most important to the community, is going to determine how you approach the project. It's going to determine who you select for the project. It's going to determine what materials you select for the project. I can go on and on. So really understanding not just your needs and your wants, but your objectives is key to being on the same page and managing expectations throughout the entire process, which is very difficult to say the least. And when you take the time to identify the things we're mentioning, that helps manage those expectations a little bit better. Once you're done with planning, then you're going to jump into pre-construction. Pre-construction, we try to keep it simple here for the sake of this presentation, but there are milestones that really need to be touched on, right? In order to get to construction, you have to go through pre-construction. What's pre-construction? Pre-construction are all the tasks that you must perform prior to commencing construction. You cannot avoid doing these tasks. You can do them poorly. You can put them in the wrong hands, but one way or another, they will get done because you have to in order to commence construction. The major milestones are here on your screen, right? Design team procurement and selection, design team contract negotiations, design specification and bid document review, and also creation, contractor procurement and selection, contractor contract negotiations, permit procurement, budgeting and scheduling, and if necessary, a material alteration vote. Those are the things that those are the milestones or the hoops that you have to jump through in order to be ready for construction. So let's break it down a little bit. Once the project or projects are identified, we need to determine which design professionals need to be brought to the table to help bring the scope to fruition. For that roofing project, you're going to need a roof consultant, or the elevator modernization, an elevator consultant, window and door project, an architect, pool project, aquatic engineer, HVAC upgrades, MEP engineer, structural concrete restoration, a forensic engineer. Maybe something that needs wind load design, structural engineer, interior designer for your interior beautification, and life safety consultant for your ELSS. These are just some examples. And there's more out there. I just wanted to give you some solid examples based on a lot of what we see when we go to these communities. We see a lot of these projects actually taking place. And more often than not, our clients don't know the consultants that they need to be brought to the table, that they need to bring to the table. So, and a quick note here, the projects will need to be classified into the want category or the need category to identify the best budgetary approach and order of priority when executing said projects. And I'm not going to get too much into this in this particular course, because we have something else to deal with budgeting and budgeting approaches. But a need project versus a want project are complete opposites when it comes to how you build your budget. Complete opposites. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that later. But in order to know which budget approach you need to take, you need to understand, is it a need or is it a want? Okay. So now that we have a thorough understanding of the various design professionals that are required to develop the scopes of work with a high level of detail, we need to select the best firms from each profession or discipline, as we call it. And sometimes people are not really sure how to do it. So how do we do it? Well, the best way to do it is through a competitive request for proposal process, also known as RFP process. Now, RFPs, they're not that complicated to build. They don't need to be overly complicated to read or to respond to. In fact, they shouldn't. They should be pretty simple. When developing an RFP, the required design professionals really need to understand a few things in order for them to respond effectively, efficiently, and timely, without a bunch of nonsense that the person on the receiving end, frankly, can't understand. So what each design professional should be responsible for, or will be responsible for, is the general scope of work, right? General. Why general? Because they're the ones that are going to make it detailed. If we had a detailed scope of work, we might not need them. We have a general scope of work, meaning we have a general idea of what it is we need to do. We need to get it very detailed on paper so that the person or persons building it have the information they need to do so. Another thing they're going to need is the scope of services, right? So they're going to need to provide the scope of services. So you have your scope of work, again, general in nature, and then you have the scope of services, right? What is that? Okay, inspection, report, bid document and specifications, maybe some assistance with bidding, assistance with permitting, right? And then ultimately construction administration throughout the course of the construction project. These are the things, these are the services that you're going to need from any given design professional, plus or minus, right? And the person building the RFP needs to know what services are needed from these design professionals. Once you understand that, or once the design professionals understand that, you're also going to want to provide any and all additional information that they might need to properly respond. Information about the property, maybe, and it could be something that's, like say how many units are in the building. It could be something as simple as that, or it could be something as simple as, is the building very seasonal? Or are there any sort of requirements within the condo docs that would limit activities taking place on the property, et cetera, et cetera. But that type of information you're gonna want to get in there as well. Then you're going to collect and analyze the proposals, and you're basically going to present the analysis to the stakeholders, right? So they can make a well-informed decision on which design professional from each discipline, like I mentioned. And when I say discipline, folks, I'm referring to the categories we rattled off in one of the previous slides, right? Whether it's a roof project or an interior beautification project or concrete restoration project, they all require a different discipline of design professional. And you want to figure out who's the best fit for the community. Now, look, 5 must-haves, folks, right? Scope of work, general, scope of services, the cost of those services, payment terms. How do they want to be paid, right? Is it based on deliverables being provided? Is it based on time? Is it based on percentages of completion of those deliverables? You have to figure out what that is. And then last but not least, deliverable timelines. Everybody needs a schedule, folks. Whether the schedule is just a rough benchmark to help manage expectations, and something to refer back to occasionally to see how on track or off track we are, you have to have something. So make sure whatever proposals you're collecting from whichever vendors have those 5 items in it at a minimum. Anything else that you want to obtain from the person you're soliciting a proposal from, obviously you'll put that request in the request for proposal. So once all the required professionals have been identified and hopefully selected, make certain that the client or the community has a seasoned construction attorney on board. And if not, you really need to get the right law firm to help you get these design professionals under contract. It's paramount, folks. This is a pivotal moment in the process. Either you're going to get it right or you're going to get it wrong. And if you get it wrong and something goes south, and more often than not that it does, what's everyone going to do? They're going to refer to the contract. And if the contract isn't worth the paper it's written on, you have no tools in your toolbox. You need mechanisms in the contract to help you deal with the what ifs. And the best people positioned for this task are seasoned construction attorneys. They're the ones that are going to help you get the legalese, right? The legal terms and conditions. And if they're working in tandem with an owner rep, they should be collaborating on business terms and exhibit creation and collection, because the exhibits can have as much teeth as the contract body itself. So it's, again, paramount, folks. Don't cut corners. We see a lot of communities not wanting to spend money on legal counsel. It pays dividends. And we see a lot of communities doing their own contract review and taking a stab at generating their own contracts. It's a big mistake. So once you have them under contract, again, such as, the consultants, the architects, the expediters, and so on. These are basically what we refer to as project participants, right? Once they've been identified and under contract, now you need to properly position yourself in order to properly manage all of these extremities. You need to stay organized. And the best way to do it is to make a primary hub of communication, right? With your designated professional strategically positioned in the center of it all, so that they could provide the necessary oversight and guidance to all of those project participants that are identified on this particular chart, all while maintaining direct communication with ownership and ultimately managing the project in an efficient, effective manner. If you can maintain this method of communication, you prevent a lot of things from slipping through the cracks, a lot of that finger pointing, and other issues. It could be legal issues, warranty issues, and so on. So now developing the scope, which in my opinion is hands down the most important part. Maybe second to having a proper contract, or maybe even before that, because without a proper scope, you can't plan. You can't be prepared. In order to prepare your community for any of these projects, it's imperative that they understand the scope with that high level of certainty that I always talk about. If you truly understand the scope, you can truly understand the time and money associated with that scope, right? Because there's only 3 components to any given project, folks, and it's scope, time, and money. And they're all directly correlated or linked. More scope means more time, more money, and typically vice versa. So if you think your scope is quite small and you think it's only going to cost this much and take that long, but yet the scope is really twice the size, but you didn't prepare for that financially or from a timing perspective, you're already destined for failure, even if it's just perceived failure, right? But at the end of the day, what makes a project successful? Well, delivering it on time and within budget. You can't establish realistic benchmarks and parameters if you don't understand the scope. And that's why I say it's the most important part of the entire process, right? So once the scope is clearly defined with that high level of certainty that we continuously talk about, at this point, we need to determine which contractors are needed to bring the overall project to fruition. And here we go, guys. Roof project, which required a roof consultant, requires a roof contractor, right? The elevator project, which required an elevator consultant, requires an elevator contractor, and so on, right? Window and door contractor, pool contractor, MEP contractor, restoration contractor, right? They are typically the restoration contractors are general contractors, but not necessarily in the sense of a general contractor utilizing nothing but subcontractors to perform the work. Restoration contractors are typically specific for restoration projects. Railing contractors, general contractors, fire safety or life safety contractors. These are just a few of the different trades that you can ultimately need to bring any of your capital improvements to fruition. Now, don't forget, the projects will need to be classified again as a want or a need. It's no different than what I was talking about earlier in order to understand the best budgetary approach and order of priority when it comes to executing the construction itself. So now that we have this thorough understanding of the contractors that are required to actually build what we need to build, we need to select the best contractors from each trade, if that's what we want to call it. And how do we achieve this? Well, you guessed it, competitive bid process, right? And generating a formal RFP to do so. So this is a little bit different, generating an RFP for contractors than generating an RFP for design professionals. Not drastically different, but a little bit different, right? So what the contractors need to understand the scope of work they're responsible for. The big difference between this scope of work that they're responsible for and the scope of work that the design professional is responsible for is the following. The scope of work that the design professional is responsible for is general in nature. The scope of work that the contractor is responsible for should be highly specific / detailed in nature. Let me give you a perfect example. If you knew that your building envelope was showing signs of concrete failure or deterioration, and there was some concrete spalling and cracking and stucco delamination, etc., you would basically know that you're probably in need of a concrete restoration project, right? To the envelope. Let's just use the envelope as an example. Well, you're going to hire a structural engineer, a forensic engineer to come in, inspect, write a report, basically identify all the deficiencies found through their inspections, estimate quantities of repair associated with the repair types or deficiencies found, and ultimately take what was a general scope, right, which is basically telling the forensic engineer, hey, Mr. Engineer, we need to restore our envelope. That's the general scope of work, is the envelope of the building. Then your engineer comes in and does what I had just rattled off, which is inspect, write a report, and then generate a detailed bid sheet identifying every deficiency / repair type and estimating quantities associated with those deficiencies / repair types. So they're the ones who make it a detailed scope. And then that detailed scope goes to the contractor. So that's the big difference. And it's no different than any other project, folks, right? You always start generally speaking, and then it gets detailed by use of the appropriate design professional. Any and all project details that may affect the contractor's schedule and job costs, like logistical challenges, et cetera, really needs to be made known as well. Every property is different, and every property has its constraints and its challenges, whether it's getting on or off the property, setting up shop somewhere on the property, making your way to the area that's in need of repair. I can go on and on. So those are the details that a contractor is going to want to see in the request for proposal in order to respond intelligently and give you what would be a competitive price, right? So once that RFP is developed, you're going to provide each trade with all the information on the to properly respond. You're going to collect and analyze those bids and present them to the community so that the board, if it's a board of directors, can make a well-informed, timely decision on which contractor they feel is the best fit for the community. Obviously, that always takes place in an open board meeting setting, open to the community. And if it's done well, the people in the community should feel comfortable with the decision the board is making if they can see that the board is making decisions on well-vetted information, right? And that's the name of the game, guys. You know, people in these communities, a lot of times they're upset because they feel helpless. They don't have control over the process. But if they can actually see that the process is being done thoughtfully and professionally, and decisions are being made on certain rationale and data, it helps, right? I mean, they still may be upset that they're, looking down the barrel of a 10, 20, $30 million endeavor, but at least it helps them understand a little bit. So the 5 must-haves, similar but a little bit different, right? Scope of work is detailed, cost, payment terms, right? Is it 30 payment right out of the gate with a percentage of payments, percentage incremental percentage payments, or is it percentage complete? You need to understand that, right? You have to have a schedule here, guys. Every contractor should be able to write a schedule. It should be detailed in nature to cover the scope of work that they're contracted to perform. And it needs to be utilized as a benchmark, because if projects are late, well, there should be some form of penalty written into their contracts. And in all fairness, folks, if a contractor can bring it home a little bit sooner, or you need to incentivize a contractor to bring it home a little bit sooner, early completion bonuses could be helpful, right? In an effort to, if you're a very seasonal building and season is very important to you, you need to ask yourself, what's it worth? So you want to have, you need a schedule in order to determine, are they bringing it home sooner, or are they bringing it home later, and what's the benefits or penalties associated with that. Another big one is assumptions, clarifications, and exclusions. That's the fine print, guys, right? And every contractor has it. You just need to look for it, and you need to know what it is that you're reading, because they're going to be basing their pricing on certain assumptions. They're also going to be basing it on certain clarifications, and they're also going to be excluding a number of things. And if you don't look at that with an open eye and truly understand what they are, well, then you don't know what you're buying. So you got to know what to look for, and you can lean on other people who have a little bit more experience, maybe know how to read this stuff, and can help you better understand it. So once all the required contractors have been identified and ultimately selected, do not forget the importance of the contract process that we discussed earlier, right? And that need for the construction attorney, guys. There's a lot of really good law firms out there that specialize in construction law. And we're not talking about the law firms that represent the association, that strictly stay in the association law lane. They really should have a construction arm or someone on their team who has that construction attorney experience, because it really pays off. Again, it pays dividends in our opinion. Okay, so let's talk about what we have here, guys. What did we do so far, right? We identified our projects. We determined whether it was a need or a want. We identified all the appropriate professionals, as we call it, or design professionals that needed to be brought to the equation. We selected them through a competitive RFP process. We had our construction attorney get them under contract. And then at that point in time, we released them to perform their services. Their services being taking that general scope and converting it into a highly detailed scope. At that point in time, we sent it out to the market. And we sent it out to reputable contractors, collected, analyzed, selected the best contractor or contractors for the projects, and ultimately got those contractors under contract by means of our legal counsel. Now we have a lot of data, folks. We not only know what all our soft costs are going to be, because we've already identified, at a minimum, identified, and at a maximum, contracted all of our design professionals, third-party consultants, legal expenses, administrative expenses, permitting expenses. We know all that. That's all your soft costs, right? Which is one of the three categories within your budget. So we have a lot of data now. Not only do we have all the soft costs, what else do we have? We have our hard costs, folks. Why? Because we put this out to the market. We collected bids through that competitive bid process, and we selected the best contractor for the job based on what? What does a contractor submit when you ask them to submit a bid? It's not just the cost, but it's also the schedule. So now we know the cost and the time associated with that detailed scope that our design professionals were so gracious to develop, right? So we got a lot of data that's very, very helpful for a number of reasons. Well, it helps us plan financially and mentally for this large endeavor. And it helps us manage the expectations of the people within the community. You can't build a proper budget or a proper schedule without understanding that scope. And in order to get the budget and the schedule for that scope, you need the contractors to properly price it. Because what happens 9 times out of 10, if it's not done this way, what we see our communities experience is the following. An engineer may come in and inspect and generate a report. And with that report, a lot of times engineers like to submit an estimate. The communities hang their hat on that estimate. The problem is that estimate may not cover all the soft costs you need, may not have the appropriate contingencies in place, and frankly, may not have the accurate pricing, what you're going to get when you send it out to the market. Why? Because, well, they're engineers, they're not contractors. They do a pretty good job of estimating, and it could be helpful for discussion purposes. But disclosing it to the community prematurely and hanging your hat on it is problematic. So this is the moment in time when you want to actually budget and schedule, right? So with all the contracts executed, the scopes of work and scope of services clearly defined, and all the costs associated with the work and services also clearly defined, it's at this point where you can say with a high level of certainty how much the project should cost and how long the project should take, right? This is when you're ready to start construction, right? So now we've gone through all of those pre-construction activities. The only one that I didn't mention in this slide is your material alteration vote, right? Which I'll touch on real quickly, and then we'll take a break. We can have a little bit of a discussion, grab some water, some coffee, use the restroom, what have you. But basically, the material alteration vote is required if you're making a change to the way a particular component of your property or your building looks, right? So if it's an aesthetic change in nature, you're going to need to vote on it. If it's a repair, replacement, or restoration, because you need to do it because there's clear signs of deficiency or is a mandate, well, then obviously that's a little bit different, and a material alteration vote is not necessarily required. We always suggest you look at your condo docs or your HOA docs, because there are some communities that deviate from the norm, which I just mentioned. But for the most part, that's basically the way that shakes out. But talk to your attorney and or review your documents so you know what your requirements are. We'll take a little bit of an intermission here, guys. Figure it's 11:42. Let's circle back in 8 minutes at 11:50. In the meantime, Marielle, if you want to take a few questions, I'm happy to sit here and chat, answer a few things. And if not, everybody can just take a break.
We do have a couple great questions, so we can do that in the intermission because I'm sure there'll be more questions in part two. So we have Carmen. Hi, Carmen. I'm so glad you're with us today. Hi, this is Carmen Rodriguez with Care Construction Inc. How does LGC help general contractors like us overcome challenges in complex projects? For example, when unexpected issues come up, like hidden structural damage in a restoration project job, or weather delays on a roofing project, how does LGC step in to support the general contractor like us in keeping the project on track for the owner?
That's a great question. Hey, Carmen, how are you? So it is important to not only support the general contractor, but to support every member of the project team. The owner rep really should be in place to make sure that the project has a successful outcome. Of course, our allegiance is to the owner, and we're there to mind their P's and Q's, as they say, and ultimately look out for their best interest. However, what is their best interest? A successful outcome. How do you get a successful outcome? By having a cohesive team, right? We like to play nice in the sandbox, as I like to say, because it's important for morale and it's important for the project's overall success. Regarding Carmen's question specifically, let's say due to weather delays, part of supporting any of the project participants, whether it's a contractor or a design professional, is making sure that the contract is explicit, right? A contract may have liquidated damages in it if the contractor is late, right, relative to their anticipated date of completion as per contract. But they should also be granted approved extensions of time for weather delays, maybe high winds if there's scaffolding on the side of the building and they can't work. Maybe some form of scope creep, whether it's additional quantities that weren't originally anticipated, whether it's additional work that the client wanted to implement while the contractor was already there. We call that while you're at it syndrome, right? Hey, while we're at it, let's go ahead and fix this or beautify that. And it's up to the owner rep to be able to deliver that information to the client in an easily receivable format in a very matter-of-fact fashion so that the client can understand, why this is happening. And not just have a go-to response, no, contractor bad, let's beat up the contractor, don't give them anything. That doesn't work, right? There is a fine line between, standing firm and pushing the project participants to the point where their morale is down and they start to fail due to that interaction. So that's how we try to support our contractors, by making things clear, explicit, and basically helping the client understand, what's happening and why it's happening. Oh, you're muted.
Excellent. And I just wanted to reiterate, because we had a couple questions about the slides. You guys will have James's contact information in the evaluation form upon submission. You'll be able to contact him directly to get a copy of the slides. And this presentation is recorded and will be posted on acebytsk.com, so you can refer back to it as well. All right. All right, from David, regarding penalties for delays, we have never been able to get companies to go along with them. What kind of terms related to delays do you feel are typical for the Florida market?
So delays, and we refer to the financial penalties for delays. We refer to them as liquidated damages, right? Or also known as LDs. They might not be as easy to enforce as one would think. Nothing in the world of construction, whether it's a contract or a bond or a term and condition in that contract, nothing's a magic wand, folks, right? We put things in there to govern the relationship between two parties or more. But in order for them to work, there's probably a lot of other requirements that need to be met, right? So in the case of liquidated damages, if a contractor is being granted extensions of time for things that they should be granted extensions of time for, like I mentioned earlier, scope creep, additional scope requested by the client, weather delays, etc., they're getting their extensions of time. If they still fail to complete the project within that duration allotted, then they are subjected to liquidated damages and frankly should be responsible to pay those liquidated damages. The language in the contract needs to support that action, and getting the proper language in there through your legal counsel is key. If retainage is being held back, as it should be, right? Typically 10%, then those delays or the liquidated damages could be and should be taken from said retention. You may be better off collecting liquidated damages if you have earlier on, if you have certain milestone requirements. So rather than just saying, well, here's the overall duration they're allotted, they were late by 1 month, therefore they have to pay $100 a day for 30 days at $3,000. Rather than waiting till the end, you could also implement other things into the contract, like milestone requirements. So if they don't achieve a particular milestone, there's a particular penalty associated with that milestone, and you need to collect it on that spot by deducting it from, let's say, the next pay application. It's a little bit more of a smaller slap on the wrist, but it shows the contractor that you're serious about time, and that should help them step up their game. What happens a lot in this industry, these projects are so long and they drag out. And at the end of the job, when the contractor is late, it's there, and there's a lot of LDs to be considered. That's when it starts to become a battle, because there's a lot at stake, and they'll try to throw everything at the client when it comes to reasons for the delay. Maybe they didn't get the extensions of time that they should have. So, properly tracking all of this is also key. You're going to want to make sure that you cross T's and dot I's in an effort to have that paper trail, so that you can deal with the LDs appropriately at the end. It's tough. Like I said, it's not a magic wand, but it's there for a reason, and like anything else in the contract, and it should be honored.
Hey, before we go
James.
to the next question, Kelly Kuhn here. Hey, everybody. Thanks for
Hey, Kelly.
taking the time to watch the presentation. Want to say that if you do want the presentation, or you want anything from LGC, contact Kelly. Don't contact James. He's very, very busy. I'm the one with the better job. So you contact me, I'll get all the information to you. So just wanted to clarify that. And I do also want to express what James said earlier, and as questions applied to, was it's all about the contract, and it's all about having a great attorney draft that contract. Nobody's a fan of attorneys until you need them, and you need them at the very beginning of this process. So James hammers it, and I love that he does. So I just want to jump in there real quick.
Awesome. And I just put Kelly's email in the chat for you guys so that you can contact him directly for the slides. James, do we have more time for another question? Should we come back at the end?
Yeah. We don't have to jump back in right now. By all means, take another question.
Okay.
Yeah.
George, this is more of an opinion that he's asking. So our HOA goes round and round on the mat alt hurdle for years. Our clubhouse, originally built in 1990, was updated in 2007. Today it is old, ugly, smelly, noisy, and actually a detriment to home prices and embarrassing to most owners. Oh no. I'm trying to tell our board no owner vote needed. It is the board's responsibility to maintain and enhance the assets. Opinion, please.
Okay, I couldn't hear everything you said, but I think I got the gist of it. So let me try to. So this is about a clubhouse, right?
Yes.
It was built in 1990, and I think you said it was renovated in 2007.
2007, yes.
Yeah, last renovated in 2007. What are we in now? 2025. So we got about 18 years of that design. It's probably quite dated, and it sounds like this particular resident would like the community to make some upgrades. Does that sound about right so far?
I'm sure George is on the board, and he's essentially saying that he's impressing to the board that there's no owner vote that's needed to make this kind of decision. It's the board's responsibility to maintain and enhance the assets.
Gotcha. Understood.
For an opinion.
Well, what's interesting is we've worked with quite a few homeowner associations, and there's been a few homeowner associations where the board has total say as to whether or not a project like this can actually be administered.
Mm.
Remember earlier I was talking about material alteration votes and there's certain requirements that need to be met, but then I gave that little disclaimer. I said you need to check your condo docs or your HOA docs to see what you're responsible for. A lot of homeowner associations, believe it or not, give the board full, call it authority, to not only execute or go through the process of executing a need project, but also give them the authority to execute a want project. But that's something that you're going to want to check with your HOA docs and check with your attorney, because the board may be able to make that decision. I think that
He's saying our HOA goes round and round on the material alteration hurdle for years, but he doesn't specify if, what the doc actually says.
well, in that case, then I would play it safe and go through the material alteration vote process, which is not that complicated. Once you get your design, call it fully baked, and it doesn't need to be, you really just need more of the visual, right? The pretty picture, so to speak. You need the pretty picture and you need the cost
Yeah.
associated with the endeavor. And if you remember, by the way, I've talked about two different budgetary approaches, right? When you approach a need project budgetarily versus a want project budgetarily, it's complete opposite. The beauty of a want project is the association or the community or the board has total control over what they choose to spend. If they want to beautify, let's just say, their lobby, their main lobby in the clubhouse upon arrival, they could say, I only want to spend $50,000 refreshing the space. That's totally up to them. I call that a financial threshold of pain. Once you set that financial threshold of pain, you take a small percentage off the top for contingency. You take another small percentage off the top for soft costs, and whatever is remaining is what you have for hard costs. But the $50,000 is your budget. So really, you just go to the community and say, hey, folks, we're going to spend $50,000 beautifying this main entrance. And this is what it's going to look like. You have to hire a designer to generate a rendering, right? A pretty picture. That's all you need, a pretty picture and a budget. And you can go out to the community and obtain a vote. And the community is going to give you feedback and either say yay or nay. They'll probably give you a lot more feedback, right? They don't like this, they don't like that, and so on. But that's not what the decision is. It's a yes or a no. Do you want it? And this is what it's going to look like, and this is what it's going to cost, or you don't. And that gives the board at least the protection, so to speak, to move forward with clear conscience and not having to worry about somebody coming back later and saying you didn't follow the appropriate material alteration process.
He's adding here, I know it's hard to believe, but the condition of the clubhouse is a financial detriment to home prices and, more important, an embarrassment to most owners, which you said, George. It is more a need than a want, just looking like 2025, not a palace.
Well, if
Yeah,
there's
of course,
if there's
of course.
deficiencies, if there's things that are in deplorable shape, they're not functioning as intended, things of that nature, then yeah, absolutely. Then it's definitely not a want anymore. Now it's a need.
Yeah.
If it's just a matter of something being outdated, aesthetically speaking, it's more of a want. It's a little bit of a stretch to say it's a need, regardless of how outdated it is. But that's
Right.
something that you're going to have to deal with your community. And again, the best way to deal with it is get that pretty picture, set that financial threshold of pain, get it out the door, and collect the feedback from the community through material alteration vote. And your legal counsel can help you with that.
Awesome. Thank you for explaining all that. Time for one more? We have got one more on the board. James, we have time for one more?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Okay, great. From David. Thanks for your comments regarding having LDs based on milestones throughout the project. I understand the language needs to be in the contract for liquidated damages. However, the question is how to get contractors to agree to penalty clauses like that. The contractors we've worked with in the past are very good, but they say we don't do that.
Then you need to find a different contractor. There's
It
a lot
is.
of contractors out there that are willing to accept liquidated damage clause in the contract. Because, I mean, think about this, folks. When you ask a contractor to price a job, you're not only asking them to price the job, that you're asking them to give you a schedule. We're telling the contractor, hey, Mr. Contractor, this is the scope of work. How much time do you need to do it? We're not telling them you have to do it within this time. We're telling them, how much time do you need to do it? They're telling us, we need this much time. So, okay, you need to be willing to hang your hat on that. As a contractor, we're in the business of estimating cost and estimating time. and we need to be able to deliver within those time and financial constraints, unless there is a reasonable extension of time to be granted, like weather, like scope creep, and so on. Otherwise, contractors really should be receptive to liquidated damages. Now, here's, David, a little bit more of a response is then maybe say, look, if you deliver it before this date, you get X dollars per day as a bonus. If you deliver it X after that date, it's X dollars penalty. That may make those contractors a little bit more receptive to the idea because you're being fair, right? It's basically two sides of the anticipated date of completion. You bring it home early, you're rewarded. You bring it home late, you're penalized. And I think that's a fair approach. But you could take a shot at some sort of offer like that.
Would you say that it's a red flag if a contractor says we don't do that? Would you?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, if contractors are telling us how much time they need, they really need to honor that. I mean, that's part of the business. It's part of what we do. They need to they need to deliver within the allotted time that they basically said they needed.
Awesome. And David says, thanks for the detailed answer. Love the carrot and stick approach. Awesome. All right. Well, that's it for the questions so far for this leg, I would say.
Okay.
We'll kick it back over to you, James, and we'll about 3/4 of the way through, just in about 30 minutes, I will put the evaluation form in the chat. So if you guys don't have that chat button open at the very bottom of your screen, go ahead and click it, open it up, and you don't have to do anything else. Just leave it there open. It will say disabled. We will just be able to send you that form in a little while. All right. All right. Back to you, James.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so like we said, we're ready to start construction. This is where we're going to basically lead the project team throughout the course of construction and bring them to the finish line, right? And like I mentioned earlier, now that we have all the necessary contractors under contract, along with all the design professionals and any other professional, by the way, third-party consultants, legal, administrative, etc. You're ready to manage this process, right? And of course, with the right leader in place, your project should run smooth and efficient and be delivered on time and in budget. Of course, back to having realistic benchmarks, realistic budgets, and realistic timelines based on accurately defined scope, your chances of success are much greater. And if it's the opposite, well, then do the math. Not so much, right? So how do we do it? Well, we refer to this as construction administration. A lot of the work that takes place during construction from the let's say the owner rep or the person managing the project is administrative in nature. The contractors are the ones that are actually performing the work itself. And then the design professionals and the owner reps and other professional project participants are performing a lot of administrative tasks. And again, that's why we refer to it as construction administration. So there's a couple of milestones we threw in here. The amount of work that goes on during construction, administratively speaking, I'm not talking about the work itself. The administrative component is tremendous, but we didn't want to add it all in here because I'd be here all day. So we threw a couple of things in here. So we like to start off with a project kickoff meeting. We think it's very important for all the players to know who all the other players are, whether they're other trades, whether they're stakeholders, whether they're design professionals, third-party consultants, whatever, right? It's important for everybody to know the overall team. It's also important for everybody to understand the overall objectives. And the best way to do that is through, well, effective communication, like anything in life, right? Without effective communication, we don't really have much. Things get lost in translation or lack thereof. And ultimately, you get the typical response of, well, I didn't know, right? So understanding the team, understanding everybody's objectives and their roles and responsibilities is key. milestones are very helpful. Understanding the end result is key, right? My mentor from back when used to say, begin with the end in mind, right? And that's a very insightful statement, right? In order to understand what you're doing, it's always best to understand what the end result needs to be, or what the what the wants and needs of your client are. And that's great, but there's a lot of work to get there. And breaking it up via milestone is very helpful for a number of reasons. Like we mentioned earlier, those milestones could be good for morale, right? So you reach a certain milestone, there's a sense of accomplishment. You can take a moment amongst the team, pat each other on the back, and so on. It's also helpful to understand, are we running behind in time at this X% milestone, or are we ahead of the game time-wise? Same holds true financially, right? Taking a moment to understand where you are financially is also key. So establishing these milestones in the beginning during your kickoff meeting, and having everyone on the team understand what those milestones are and who's responsible for what, and when it comes to achieving said milestones, is going to be quite helpful. Deliverables. Everyone on the team has some form of deliverable or some sort of role and responsibility that they need to be aware of, and they need to be held accountable to provide. And whoever is managing that project, like if we're using the owner rep as an example, one of the primary roles of an owner rep is to make sure everybody else is doing their job, right, and doing it timely, and doing it with the level of quality expected, and so on, and making sure that there's a well orchestrated sequence of events taking place so that the work is being performed efficiently and safely, and so on. But you can't do any of that unless you understand these key elements. And we mentioned schedule here, right? Breaking up the overall project into milestones is one thing, but having that detailed schedule, that day-to-day schedule, is really important to understand how far you're falling behind, how far you're ahead, who needs to be scheduled and when, what type of long lead time items are we subjected to, and so on and so forth. So having that schedule is key. The general contractor is responsible for generating that schedule, that detailed schedule, and it should be a contract requirement. And if the contract is failing to provide, there should be some sort of penalty in there, because without that schedule, folks, you're flying blind, and time goes and it goes and it goes. And then you get to the end of the job and you have liquidated damages, and you might not be able to capitalize on it because the contractor is going to make a bunch of arguments to fight them off, some valid, some not. And the only way to deal with it is to end up in court, right? So we want to avoid that, right? Litigation. But you gotta lean on the project participants to actually produce the things that they're contractually obligated to produce, and update them accordingly. So maintaining lines of communication. This is what we talked about before with effective communication and the importance of. So with the project kickoff meeting behind us, the entire team familiar with one another. Obviously, lines of communication are exceptionally important, but they really need to be enforced throughout the entire process. Whoever is responsible for orchestrating the entire project and all the project participants within really needs to be at the center of that communication funnel, as we like to call it, so that nothing slips through the cracks. It limits finger pointing. It mitigates exposure to certain financial pitfalls, timing pitfalls, legal pitfalls, warranty issues, and so on. So it's key that whoever is the primary hub of communication, that is maintained throughout the project. Otherwise, a lot of people don't really know what's happening. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, as we like to say. And then you end up with a lot of mistakes that are very costly and timely to correct. So we like to emphasize that's very important. As far as analyzing and ultimately tracking, but as far as analyzing is concerned, look, there's a lot of professionals that are going to be involved in a particular project. And they're going to be making certain suggestions on the best way to approach, whether it's a design related approach or whether it's a means and methods approach from the general contractor or the trades under that general contractor. They're all producing some form of documentation, which needs to be thoroughly analyzed. And if you have the right professional in place to properly analyze the project documentation, it's really helpful in controlling the project's destiny. Without properly scrutinizing or analyzing the documentation that's produced or what we're told, we may be led in the wrong direction. We see clients ending up down a path that they probably could have avoided if they had the right individual or individuals in place to have that professional debate over whether or not that's the right direction. We like to always strategize on better ways to approach a project, whether it's during planning, pre-construction, or construction. There's always a better way to do it, a more efficient way that could save time, could save money, could save disruption, loss of amenities. I can go on and on. So really having that thoughtful exchange and that professional debate with the people involved is key. But you got to have somebody who can actually do it. Of course, tracking everything as these debates or collaboration are taking place and decisions are being made, that's going to be key to keeping you on the right path because you have the documentation that supports the decisions. So, it's a big part of the administration that goes into a large scale capital improvement project, because a lot of times what happens is decisions are made, they're not properly tracked, and then something you'll see the outcome deviated from what was discussed. You go to find that paper trail and it doesn't exist, and then you really don't have anything a leg to stand on. So it's a big part of the process, the administrative component. Staying the course. So a lot of decisions that are made really need to be kept. Right. So aside from the unforeseen or concealed condition, which can change the scope of work, you really need to stay the course and do not change. Another thing, another thoughtful statement my mentor used to say is change is the enemy. And every time a client decides to change something because they want to, the ramifications that timing and financial ramifications are tremendous. And they're really hard to quantify at that point in time, but it really is a domino effect, folks. And it's with the slightest change. And like I said, you really can't properly quantify it at that moment. But more often than not, it creates bottlenecks and cost overruns that really can't be undone. And this is when things start dragging out. And and by the way, we talked about liquidated damages and your ability to enforce. If you make a design change in the midst of construction, it impacts everyone involved, not just the contractor performing that one portion of the work. But you need to revise the drawings, which means the design professionals are tasked with doing so. They need to be submitted to the building department so that the building department is aware of said change. And then they need to be priced. A change order needs to be generated from the contractor. This is a lot of administrative work, folks, and that's a big block of time. That change order needs to be reviewed, approved, possibly negotiated, possibly additional proposals need to be solicited if it's a big ticket item and you need to justify it with the community. This takes a big block of time. This is all before the work can begin. And if other work is contingent upon that work being started and finished, that's your bottleneck. And again, it's hard to quantify at the moment, but it really impacts the end result. So not only is it hard to quantify, from the client's perspective or the owner rep's perspective, it's hard to quantify from the contractor's perspective. And they may submit a change order for the additional work or the change in work from a monetary perspective, but they may say, well, I can't really tell how much longer it's going to take, because they're not aware how long it's going to take the design professional to make the change, for it to go through the building department for permitting sake, for their trades to price and so on. And that's going to be their argument when they're fighting off LDs, as an example. So again, stay the course, folks. It's key. So this particular slide is a great illustration of the impact that change can have, right? The importance of clear scope definition during the early development phases of a project, right? So if you look off to this, it's basically a chart, right? And all the way off on the left, you have your impact. At the bottom, it's low. Upper, a little toward the top end of that, the impact is high. And then you see your project phases at the bottom, right? Project definition, preliminary design, detailed design, contractor procurement, and then ultimately your construction. So let's start at the beginning, the bottom left-hand corner, right? And you'll see it says cost to implement change in scope, time, and money, right? So this is when you want to do it, right? You want to make any and all changes right at the beginning of the project. The cost to implement the change is very low. If you go to the top, the ability to influence the change is very high. So you have a really good impact for a very low cost during the project definition phase. As you progress to the right and you jump into preliminary design and detailed design and so on, you can see that the cost to implement the change starts to increase, and you can see the ability to influence it starts to decrease. By the time you're in construction, the cost to implement a change is tremendous. And your ability to influence the change is bad, right? It's not a good thing. That's why we say stay the course, make your decisions, stick to them. If at the end of the project, after you've closed out all your permits, you've got your certificate of occupancy, you decide you don't like a particular component of what was done, you deal with it after the fact. Otherwise, you're going to create a big mess that could lead to a lot worse things like litigation and so on. So we really can't stress it enough, folks. Make your decisions and live with them and deal with them after the contractual agreement has come to fruition. So once we get through construction in its entirety, it's our opportunity to enter into the closeout phase. This is where we collect any and all documentation and organize it, relative to the project that's transpired throughout the course of the project. Whether it's warranty information, operation and maintenance manuals, manufacturer warranties, labor warranties, things of that nature, as well as, releases of lien and making sure permits are closed out, all inspections performed, of course. This is an opportunity for us to collect, review, and ultimately deliver, and basically put a nice neat bow on everything and hand the project documentation over to the stakeholders so that they can reference that information in the future if need be. Whether it's just trying to educate themselves on what transpired throughout any given course of the project, or if they need to research a particular material because they need to change a small portion of it, whatever the case is, right? That organized documentation is key, right? And you're also going to want to punch the project out, where you generate your punch list. You have the appropriate contractors and trades perform said punch list, and then ultimately punch list gets signed off on as completed. Again, collecting those warranties, and basically you're at the finish line. So, there is a method to the madness, folks, and if it's properly executed along the way, you'll save yourself a bunch of time, money, and aggravation that you really just didn't have to waste or experience. But following the process is key. Try not to set arbitrary deadlines within your community, like, oh, I have to start this project before Thanksgiving because of A, B, and C, or, those are arbitrary deadlines. The process takes what the process takes. Getting it done efficiently is going to be done if you have the right professionals in place, and setting realistic benchmarks out of the gate is going to lend a hand when it comes to managing the expectations, not just of the board and management, but of the people that live in the community. So again, method to the madness, and it lends a hand to a more of a pleasant experience and a positive outcome at the end. Here we put some FAQs, which we covered earlier, so I won't go through them now. I did discuss them earlier on, but I put them here in writing so that you have them when we disseminate the overall presentation. It's basically, what is an owner rep? Why do I need one? Why shouldn't we utilize our architect, engineer, board members, or property managers? And when is the best time to hire an owner rep? If you want a little more information on us, our website's on there. But I'll open it up for discussion now, and happy to go back and forth for, as long as you guys want to chat. Ariel, did we lose you?
Until we get her back, James, can you give an example or two where a client didn't really concentrate on what the scope was going to be, or where they tried to change the scope midstream, and how much more of a challenge that is versus having that done at the beginning? And sometimes it's unavoidable, but we're talking about the avoidable times.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let's break it into two buckets, right? Let's break it into a need and a want. So you have a concrete restoration project on your hands, and you decide to hire a forensic engineer to perform an inspection on your building. And you solicit proposals from a few engineers to do so. And the engineers are looking at your project through a slightly different lens. One engineer wants to inspect 50% of your building facade. I'll just use the facade as an example. One engineer wants to inspect 25%, another engineer wants to inspect 10%. That's not an apples to apples approach, right? You really should get them all on the same level playing field, and at the same percentage. In our professional opinion, the higher the percentage, the better sampling. The better the sampling. The better the sampling, the closer you are to reality when it comes to that scope definition that we keep emphasizing. Unfortunately, we see a lot of communities say, no, I don't want to spend that much money, and they end up gravitating toward a lower percentage of inspection. That's mistake number one. Hire the right professional engineer and give them the latitude to do their job. This is where it all begins. It's with their inspection and ultimately their scope definition, which is going to make or break whether or not you have adequate budgetary benchmarks. And if you don't, you're not only going to miss your mark, but you're going to mismanage the expectations of the community. They're not going to be prepared mentally or financially. They're going to be quite upset, to say the least. So that's what we call, and people can't understand, well, oh, the project was originally supposed to be 2 million and now it's 6 million. Well, it was probably supposed to be 4 million, but because we only thought it was 2 million, you're paying much higher unit costs, because there's always an economies of scale in everything in life, right, folks? So you're going to pay higher unit costs, which you're contracted for throughout the entire cost of the job. So when those quantities, those estimated quantities of repair reach 100% and they've been exhausted, you're paying that same high unit cost for every change order relative to that same repair type. And you end up, the scope of work increases tremendously, all because, we wanted to step over dollars to pick up nickels, as I like to say, and not let the engineer have the latitude that they should have to perform the appropriate inspections. On the flip side of that coin, when it comes to, let's say, a need project, you might not necessarily have scope creep or very little of, because typically on beautification projects, there's much less scope creep or, like you would with, let's say, a restoration project. However, there is a big, while you're at it syndrome is a real thing, right, guys? Right? It's, that's where the client says, hey, while we're at it, let's go ahead and add a helicopter pad to the roof. That's going to really change the game, and that's going to push the project out and cost a bunch of money. So defining that scope and sticking to that scope is key. And not making changes along the way unnecessarily is key to actually hitting your mark.
Beautiful. So I'll read. David Swats asked a question. He says, is it best to have a project manager to cut through the smaller projects like drywall issues?
I would probably say not really. I mean, if the scope is small in nature, you could, I mean, I don't know if you have a number of these small projects and you wanted to hire, let's say, a project manager just to help keep them organized and execute them in a way that makes sense to the community, whether it's making financial sense or making sense from a sequencing perspective. So in that case, you may want to put somebody in place to deal with it. If it's real small and it's really just a repair, you can hire a contractor directly to make said repair. I don't know the magnitude of these drywall repairs, but if they're small in nature, you probably don't need that layer of representation. If it was a large scale drywall replacement project, maybe due to floods or water loss or something like that. There are a lot of water restoration companies out there. I think WRG is with us today, and they're great with that. They can be very helpful in those types of endeavors. So I'm not really sure what the scope is, but depending on the scope would determine whether or not
Sure.
you get someone in place.
Well, agreed. So Eric, and your last name is Aprigiano. I'm not Italian. I'm not really good with names, but wonderful question. So James, please comment on the arrangement in which the structural engineer who develops the scope of work on a concrete restoration project gets 10% of the contractor cost for providing project oversight. What would you suggest? That is such a great question. Thank you, Eric.
That's a great question. Well, it's a conflict of interest. No design, in our opinion, design professionals or owner reps or anyone for that matter should not be compensated as a percentage of job cost, because there's nothing incentivizing that individual or that firm to keep job costs down. As job costs increase, well, they make more money. So
Right.
I would never enter into a contract where the design professional or owner rep earned their living as a percentage of the job cost. What you want is you want to agree to the scope of work, the scope of services, and you want a cost for those services. And you're going to agree to those payment terms and deliverable timelines. Those are the 5 must-haves I mentioned earlier, because now you know what you're buying. You know that the time in which they are intended to deliver contractually. And there is no correlation between their fee and job cost. And they should be looking out for the client's best interest, financially speaking, and looking to keep job costs down versus the other way around. It's a big conflict of interest, folks. I wouldn't enter into a contract where it was a percentage of job cost.
Earlier, there was a mention of a red flag. And if you have an engineer that wants to charge a percentage of what work's going to be done by the contractor, you might want to look for another engineer. And I know your owner's rep would definitely suggest that if you have a good qualified owner's rep. So that's a fantastic question. It's something we see a lot. And then, so James loves to say, you don't know the cost of a concrete restoration project until it's done. And I remember when we first started working together, and he would say that, I would cringe, but it's the truth. So this last question really ties to that, James. So our next question, Kevin Lyon says, how do we quote concrete restoration when chasing, wow, now the screen's moving, geez. When chasing rusty rebar ends up making us go beyond the scope of the project? Did you follow that question? Because the screen, it kept moving because some of the people were asking questions and responding. So
yeah, no, I got the question. Yeah, and it's a good question. Yeah, so
great question.
Well, Kelly beat me to it, but I'm going to reiterate what he said. With restoration in particular, the reality is this, guys, and you may not want to hear this, but it's the truth. Nobody is going to be able to predict with 100% accuracy how much a restoration project is going to cost or how long it's going to take until it is done. That is a fact. Now, you can prepare with a high level of certainty and with a small margin of error if you follow the process that we lay out in this presentation and then some. But basically, what you want to do is you want to define that scope of work with as much certainty as possible to limit the exposure to the unforeseens. Step one, give your engineers the latitude to perform a proper, thorough inspection. Yes, you will pay more out of the gate, but it's worth every penny. Let them do as much as they need to generate an adequate scope of work. Some of what they may need, well, some is going to be visual, some is going to be physically sounding, some may be destructive testing, some may be removal of certain materials to get to areas of concern. You're going to spend a little bit of money there, and engineers are going to need a contractor to help them clear certain areas out so that they can get their eyes on certain things. It's an investment, folks. Spend the money. It's not going to be that much in the grand scheme of things. I promise you, it's worth every penny. At that point in time, you're going to have a pretty good scope of work because you have a very thorough sampling. If you do have an owner rep, and that owner rep is really seasoned in these types of projects, they're going to know what to look for, what repair types might be missing from that bid sheet. Are the quantities truly adequate or not? And whether they are or they aren't, how are we preparing from a budgetary perspective? What percentage of contingency are we carrying? Are we truly carrying all of our, covering all of our soft costs in our budget? Without a robust budget and a complete budget covering all your soft costs, your hard costs, and your contingencies, you have an inadequate budget. And if you have an inadequate budget, I don't care if you have 100% contingency, you may not cover your costs. So the best way to answer your question is to prepare. And the best way to prepare is all the things that we previously stated. And again, you won't hit your mark with 100% certainty because frankly, it's not possible unless it's like getting struck by lightning, to tell you the truth. You'd have a better chance of getting struck by lightning, but you can prepare within a small margin of error. And frankly, that margin of error should be covered by your contingency. So there are ways to build a budget and actually have that budget work for you so that you can bring it home and say, wow, we actually brought this thing home within the constraints of the budget. That's something to be said. You deserve a pat on the back for that. Then the schedule is a separate thing, right? So, you know, but your time and money parameters need to be adequate.
And getting hit by lightning might be less painful than not having an adequate budget. we have an example. We have a potential client we're talking to, and they possibly, we could write a book on, and I don't think they did it intentional. I think people come from a good place, but a lot of times they have such fear of telling the community how much it's going to cost to do a project. So they actually had a full concrete restoration on a very large building. I won't say where it is. I almost said it, and I won't, because I don't want to, embarrass anybody. But they thought they were going to spend about $2 million. And James said, it might be a $2,000 or $2 million budget, and it's $6 million. Theirs is over $20 million, and it never was under that by much. It was a very large project, but their expectations were so wrong that it's almost like a mutiny in the community, and it all could have been avoided had it been dealt with correctly. So, now we get to try to clean it up, which we're happy to do, but it's very important to go at this with big boy and big girl pants, knowing that, you've got the safety of everybody that are your neighbors, and let's just look at it in its reality and do all the preliminary work so you don't have to deal with it later.
I just want to interrupt for one moment. I want to make sure that you guys see the evaluation form in the chat, because I see some of you are dropping off. I want to make sure that you know that that is a mandatory required thing. So please click that button in the chat, fill out the evaluation form. You'll have an opportunity to opt in to be contacted about by any of our amazing partners, as well as these gentlemen here. If you would like a copy of the presentation, again, the email for Kelly directly is in the chat. I will put that in there again. If you're not seeing the chat, click the chat button on the bottom of your screen, open it. I'll give you guys a second to do that, and then I'll post it again in there for you to take advantage of. All right, and again, I want to reiterate, because I had one question about this. This session is recorded and will be published on acebytsk.com in the next few days, so you'll be able to rewatch it, refer back to it, share it, all that good stuff. All right. Okay, thanks,
So
guys. Back to you.
There's another question from Gaylord Costume. James, I don't think you can answer the question, but I want to see how you dance on this one. What is the ballpark cost of a rep for roof replacement of 60 condos? And I know there's not enough information to answer that question, so I apologize. Gaylord, we need more details, and I'm still not sure if we could help on that question.
Yeah, we would need a little bit more information in order to give you what I like to call a thoughtful proposal, or just at least a thoughtful response. So, we're happy to do that. It could be a simple conversation. Just reach out to Kelly and we'll continue that dialogue.
What are some
Absolutely.
of the aspects of a replacement cost like that may make a difference?
Some of the aspects you said?
Yeah, some of the aspects that may make a difference in the cost.
Materiality that's ultimately selected could determine, the overall financial outcome. The substrate and condition of, whether it's a wood substrate, a concrete substrate, what's the condition of that? Does it need any remediation, repair, replacement? What's on top of the roof? What type of equipment is up there? Any type of, rooftop equipment, which sits on, the dunnage. Is the dunnage in good condition? Is the electrical components in good condition? Because it might not just be a roof replacement, right, guys? It might have a lot of ancillary costs due to ancillary scope. You may need to remove and replace certain HVAC equipment, remove and replace or upgrade certain electrical equipment. There may be concrete restoration to the parapet wall. Maybe roof drains need to be replaced. You have to take into consideration not just the roof itself, but everything within the confines of the roof footprint. Because otherwise what will happen is you'll just hire a roofing contractor to go up there, remove and replace. And when they get up there, they're going to say, hey, I can't move forward because this particular item is in deplorable shape and it's in my way and I need you to go ahead and replace it. Now you're not prepared. Now you're scrambling to get it done so as to not hold up the roofing contractor.
Yeah.
And you pay through the nose to get it done. You got to prepare for all this in advance.
Not to mention, so less information, it's 60 condos. That might be 10 buildings with 6 condos each and they're one floor. Or it could be one building that is, it could be 10 stories with 6 units on each floor. So getting all the information is important, which we're happy to do. But
cool.
That's
thanks, guys.
That's the
Yeah, a
challenges.
great opportunity to chat, chat directly with the team. And I just put Kelly's email again in the chat, which I'm sure, happy to arrange the proper meeting for you guys. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask those good questions. I mean, our whole community of experts really are a resource for you guys. I know I reiterate that every single week, but if you're struggling with something or you have a proposed project or you just want to put feelers out there, that is what they're there for. So I really encourage you to take advantage of that.
And not every inquiry turns into a job, nor do we want it to
Of
be.
course,
But we're always
right.
happy to give information to say, oh, yes, this would be great for something for us to do, or
Right.
something, or here, just go at it this way. It's
Right.
not in our wheelhouse, or it's not a big enough project, or whatever. But we're happy to do that.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. I hope you guys really, take advantage of that kind of offer. And I know that all of our partners think really similarly. So, I say it every week, but I hope you guys take advantage of that really amazing resource. We have a thank you in the questions, which is not a question, but we do appreciate it. And I'm glad that so many of you guys found this presentation helpful. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, James or Kelly, to round out the discussion?
No, I think we've covered most of it. If anybody has any questions, you know how to find us, but we really
Awesome.
appreciate the opportunity, guys, and the time and attention. So thank you for that.
It was fantastic. And I think this was a very needed topic that people, want to understand more. They want to understand the process, the scope, and how it all works. So this was fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Let's see. We have a lot of thank yous. Great job.
Yeah, we appreciate
Valuable
that. That's the best.
information. Excellent. I appreciate this. I'm just going to remind you guys again, we're going to have this presentation up on the ACE by TSK website.com.